Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another video on History Vibe podcast. Today I'm joined by Professor M. David Litwa, and today we're going to be talking about the Gnostic Gospels, the origin of the Gnostics, and what they believe, and the various different Gnostic groups. Before I get to my questions, David, can you tell the audience a bit about your courses and also your YouTube channel as well?
Absolutely. I really hope that after hearing this interview, you'll have a lot of interest in folks who are wanting to look at alternative sources for Jesus. And I'll tell you why that's important in the interview itself. But I've got two courses. They're called Gnostic and Nag Hammadi Literature, Parts 1 and 2. And there are links to these. Hopefully, Jacob can put these in the description, and you can get
They
the
will be there.
two-in-one price in the Gnostic bundle. You can get the two-in-one price. But anyway, the goal of these courses is to go through every single quote-unquote Gnostic text that is in the Nag Hammadi library. So if you don't know what the Nag Hammadi library is, it's a collection of texts that were found in 1945. It's a so-called Gnostic discovery of texts actually written by Gnostics themselves. And so it's just as significant as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's really important for everyone to know a little bit about this. And of course, I hope everyone knows me from the YouTube channel, and I hope you'll check that out as well.
And I'll have the link to David's YouTube channel in the description below, and also in the pinned comment, including the links to his courses as well. So my first question is, who are the Gnostics? And the reason I'm asking this is for those that have never heard of the Gnostics before, they have no idea about them.
So Gnostics are just, you can think of them as alternative Christians. So they are Christians who have a variety of different ideas about Jesus, have a variety of different ideas about how the world came to be, and they have a variety of different ways about thinking about how the world will come to end, how we are saved, and so on and so forth. You can become a Gnostic today. Being a Gnostic is not just a phenomenon of antiquity, but it takes more than a claim to special knowledge to be a Gnostic. For me, if we're going to talk about Gnosticism and antiquity, we need to have this belief in what I call negative demiurgy. That is the idea that the creator God is evil. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there can be multiple creators, but the one who created this world is evil. And it doesn't necessarily mean that God is the true God. In fact, it's often the case that, it's most often the case that you have a superior God to the creator, and the creator is viewed as a sort of middle management deity. There's all different kinds of beliefs about who that creator is, and that creator is a kind of shall we say, inheritance from the Jewish scriptures. He is Yahweh. And so making a decision about Yahweh became very important for Christians. So not everyone accepted him as the true and high God. Many Christians viewed him as middle management. And amidst the range of views, you could view him as either a neutral being who was just or fair, as a perfectly good being, or as an evil being, with all sorts of options in between. But if you believe that he is evil, then, in my opinion, this qualifies you as a Gnostic.
How many Gnostic Gospels do we have?
Lots. Of course, it depends on what you mean by gospel. So, I've got a book coming out on the secret book of John, or the Apocrypha of John. I think that that's a gospel text, but it's not called a gospel. We have other books called the secret book of James. I think that's a gospel text, even though it's not called a gospel. But if you want to be strict and say we only want to look at the texts that were in antiquity called gospels, then we have 5 main texts, which are alternative Christian literature. Basically, we have the Gospel of Thomas, probably being the most famous, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Truth, associated with the Valentinians, the Gospel of Judas, associated with the quote-unquote Sethians, and the Gospel of Philip, which also seems to be a Valentinian collection. So those are the 5 other Gospels. But in the Nag Hammadi library, there are about 50 texts, and many of them also can qualify as Gospel literature. If you define Gospel literature as any sort of literature telling the message about the significance of Jesus.
Are they all using our Gospels, and do they have any material that predates our Gospels?
Well, the question of dating is an interesting one, and we need to step back and get some background on this one. Dating is a scholarly exercise. Absolutely none of these Gospels come with dates, and Gospels that are earlier are not necessarily more true. So, in a sense, dating is irrelevant, but we still do it as historians because we want to know what's earlier and what's later. But the fact is, the Gospel literature, because it's all anonymous, and that includes the stuff that made it into the canon, because it's all originally anonymous and doesn't have a name, it doesn't really have many features that actually are datable. And what I tell people, and one of the reasons why studying the Gnostic literature is very important, is because the texts that made it into the canon have no more claim to truth than texts that did not make it into canon. And in fact, I really recommend that if you're a serious student of early Christian literature, that you take off your 4th century glasses. Your 4th century glasses are the glasses which tell you what's in the canon and what's not in the canon, because it's only in the 4th century that that's really established and put on paper. So if we take those glasses off and we're just in the 2nd century, we get a picture somewhat like this. There's lots and lots of gospel literature, lots and lots of gospel books being written, edited, and completed in the 2nd century. And basically everything that we have evidence for, was edited in the 2nd century, finished or completed in the 2nd century. So even if you think that some of these documents go back to first century traditions, like you can think of the Gospel of Thomas as a saying source that began in the 1st century and was like a rolling corpus, to use April DeConnick's term. It just kind of accrued sayings over time and appeared in different stages. That is perfectly fine. But the final product is probably early 2nd century, 140s, because it refers to the temple never being rebuilt again. And that only became clear after the Bar Kokhba revolt. But I personally think that what we call the canonical Gospels, or the Gospels which became canonical, that all of those are post-Bar Kokhba as well in their final versions, and that really all of these Gospels are highly edited and rolling corpuses, basically, that they develop and change over time. And our really first evidence, our first material evidence of any of these is late 2nd century at the earliest. And that's for, it doesn't matter whether you're become in the canon or not in the canon. They're all attested, that is, on papyri. The earliest time that attestation occurs is in the late 2nd century. So for all intents and purposes, I think that one can approach this material trying to gain a kind of neutrality and just going ahead, and I know it's difficult to do this for many of you, but absolutely give it a try. Much of learning is unlearning. So if you can unlearn your canonical bias, that's going to be really important. What's a very useful exercise for everybody is to go ahead and read the so-called Gnostic Gospels for yourself, and then go back and read the Gospels that made it into the canon and see if you can see what the similarities and differences are. I think, if you'll be surprised if you go a little bit of reverse engineering and prioritize the stuff that didn't make it into the canon, because we're all dealing with a bias of what might be called a familiarity bias. We have a familiarity, in fact, an over familiarity with this stuff that makes it into the canon for obvious reasons. So in fact, it's a useful exercise to kind of bracket that and just pretend that there's no canonical divide, and prioritize and really learn and study the Gnostic Gospels, and then come back to the more familiar, let's say, more familiar Gospels, and see what light they can shed on each other. I think you'll find amazing treasures, and I think you'll find many similarities and many differences. And I think that if you're honest with yourself, it will become clear that there is no clarity on what's early or late, right? So in the Gospel of Thomas being a great example, there's lots of sayings of Jesus. At least 50% of the Gospel of Thomas is sayings of Jesus that we already know from stuff that made it into the canon. And then we have to argue saying by saying which is earlier and which is later. And despite many, many books, I just don't think that it's clear either way. So that's really important to keep in mind. If if you have this belief, which is this belief that you think the earlier is the truer, I would encourage you to say, look very carefully at that belief and see whether, in fact, it is true. Truth really is timeless. But if you care about dates, take my Redating the Gospels course. I go through everything there. And I think it is, in fact, demonstrable that lots of material in the so-called Gnostic Gospels is at least contemporaneous with, if not earlier than, in the canonical Gospels. And that's because I think that all of this material in its final form is 2nd century.
Do some of the Gnostic Gospels or texts portray Jesus as the son of a different god?
Sure they do. But people like Marcion read what later became canonical material with the same point, right? So you can read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of John in exactly the same way, that the Father of Jesus refers to a different being than Yahweh, that Yahweh is in fact Lord of a sort of a tribalistic God, Lord of a particular region and tribe, and that Jesus' Father is much more universal and more like the Platonic good, that he is both universal, saving everybody, and good in all respects, in all times, in all places, and in all ways. That's definitely how you could read any of this material. So, when you say Gnostic, we're also talking about a way of reading the texts. Admittedly, in many of these other texts, like the Secret Book of John, for instance, it's quite clear that Jesus views the Creator as evil, and so there's a kind of a greater clarity, and he tells the backstory of the Creator and so on and so forth. But in fact, I think lots of these texts have a variety of positions that, as I said at the beginning, you can view the Creator again as good and bad, a sort of neutral being, a fair or just being, outright evil or outright good, and everything in between. And that's what we find in this literature. The Nag Hammadi library, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, they're not just one thing. They present a whole variety of views of the Creator. But what everyone has agreed is that, yes, Jesus has something to do with salvation, and therefore his Father must be good. The question is his Father the Creator of this world? And that's actually, is his Father Yahweh, is another more direct way of putting it. And that's an open question.
Do some of the Gnostics think that the Hebrew God is Satan himself?
No, I wouldn't say that. So what they do is they portray Yahweh, or Yaldabaoth as he's called, the creator of this world, playing some of the roles of Satan and having some of the satanic traits, but they're perfectly happy to have the creator and Satan running around at the same time. It's not that God is Satan. Christians in this second century, they all kind of agreed that whoever Satan is an angel of God, and that God could be the lower creator, or it could be the higher or supreme God. And they disagreed about that, but it's perfectly fine to have both an evil creator and a Satan figure. And yes, it's true that they do some similar things and they play similar roles in this literature, but they are actually quite distinct in many cases.
When do we start seeing the first evidence of these Gnostics?
It depends. Depends on who you believe. Actually, the so-called Orthodox or proto-Orthodox, like Irenaeus, view and Eusebius view Simon of Samaria as the first Gnostic, and he is a contemporary of Jesus. So, that's the irony of all this, that the early Catholics have this narrative that heresy must come later, but then Simon ruins that for them. And they kind of ruin it for themselves, because of course they don't need to imagine Simon as the first Gnostic, but they do. And if you date Simon, he's contemporaneous with Jesus and earlier than Paul. So, that means that Gnosticism is actually prior to what you might think of as, or it's at least contemporaneous to what you might think of as Pauline Christianity, but something that Paul himself was a Gnostic as well. So, you have that complexity and that wrinkle. I think the key is both Simon and Paul can be read or understood in a Gnostic way. And you can do that at any time. You can do that right now. That was done way back in the second century as well. That's perfectly fine. But since the way I'm defining it, at least, is you need to have an evil creator to have Gnosticism, I would argue that that's probably not first century. That's early second century, and that arises particularly probably in Egypt, Alexandria of the early second century.
And when did the Gnostics start being viewed as heretics?
That depends. I think people dispute about the invention of heresy, but some say that Justin Martyr created the concept of heresy. Some think it's a little bit later. In a sense, because in the second century, there's no verifiable, there's no centralized authority structure, there's no pope in the college of cardinals, so to speak. Charges of heresy and counter heresy, they don't really have any bite until the 4th century. When Christians have gained the power to kill other Christians, that's when it becomes serious. Way back in the 2nd century, Justin recommends to the Roman emperors that they kill his Christian opponents, kind of hunt them down and get rid of them. But, that he's not very successful. And in fact, the irony of that is Justin himself gets killed by the Roman emperors, or by the local mayor, effectively the mayor of Rome at the time. So it's not like Rome views Justin any more friendly than Valentinus. Valentinus never had a problem with Rome, and Valentinus is a good example of an early Christian who, during his lifetime at least, people never seem to have had any kind of problem with him and never seem to have made any kind of accusation. But as in many cases, it's after the death of these figures, as time moves on and as doctrinal movements change and certain beliefs become valorized and certain other beliefs become demonized, that people retrospectively, through an act of revised memory, look back on some people as heretics and on others as ancestors. But all of this is a matter of reception history, and I don't think it's very useful for history. And I really wouldn't recommend even asking that question, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's sort of like taking a 26th century perspective on the 21st century. Well, maybe in the 26th century I'm Orthodox, or they'll call me something else, and they'll call N.T. Wright a heretic. Is it useful to think in that way? Not really, because I mean, we're here, we're right now, we're doing history. We want to understand how we think of each other in the terms that, on our own terms, so to speak. And in the 2nd century, yeah, I think a very useful task, just as I recommended, get rid of this canonical, non-canonical divide, and get rid of this orthodoxy heresy divide, because it's not faithful to history, and it's not accurate. It's not good history, and it's misleading. You continue to replicate the tropes of later 4th century Orthodox bishops, and that's not very critical.
Well, thank you for joining me today, M. David Litwa.
Thank you. And I just want to wish everyone a very warm and happy new year. It's fairly early here, still in 2025. I'm not sure when this video will come out, but I am so pleased that in this space, I see Jacob and many others thriving and really doing a good job, I think, bringing some real scholarship to the attention of others. And I hope that everyone will be, circumspect this year, and really try to invest in yourself and to deepen your knowledge, and to pursue those teachers whom you think can really aid and benefit you, and not just, give, as we say, the usual hype or something fairly temporary. I think that this is really an important task, and I hope that everyone has that New Year's resolution to really invest in yourself, to go deeper, and to invest in those people whom you think are worth investing in.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.